Now, remember, the health message is the right arm of the message. It's not the head. All right? And we need to keep that in balance. And that's where I think we have a big problem, is if we get things out of proportion. Now, Mrs. White wrote in Counsel of Doctrine, page 400, that she'd been preaching a health message, that was in 1903, for 30 years. So that means by 2000, this health message has been preached for 127 years. And by 2012, for nearly 139 years now, we've had this health message in our church. Now, when you think about it, what's happening in a health message, my second talk, I really get excited. When I get excited, I have a tendency to talk too fast, so I'll try not to talk too fast. Okay? But I tell you, we have so much data today from a scientific standpoint to substantiate our health message. You never have to be ashamed of our health message. And I'll tell you more about that in details. Now, you remember the Bible says in 2 Chronicles 20:20, to believe in the Lord your God and you will be established. Believe his prophets and you will what? Prosper. Okay? Now, the other statement that blew my mind, and this is still an introduction for me, page 48, selected messages. I know I'm talking to the choir, I'm preaching to the choir here, but like I said, this is talk for lay people. I want to tell you, you've heard this, page 48. Satan is constantly pressing in the spurious to lead away from the truth. The very last deception of Satan will be to make of none effect the testimony of the Spirit of God. Now, I have lived long enough. I have been years ago. You would never hear what's going around now in our churches against Ellen G. White. We are living in, to me, one of the last days when you hear this is what the testimony said. And she goes on to say there will be a hatred kindled against the testimony which is satanic. The workings of Satan will be to unsettle the faith of the churches in them. For this reason, Satan cannot have so clear a track to bring in his deceptions and bind up souls in his delusions if the warnings and reproofs and counsels of the Spirit of God are heeded. So you can see now why I have a burden for Ellen G. White too. We need to educate the people about Ellen G. White. They really don't know a lot of it. And they know a little bit, and when it steps on their toes, they're mad. But so, as I read that statement over, I think one of the greatest deceptions that we have right now, the last step, is this very thing that you and I are saying. You and I are living in it at the time. And that means Jesus is soon to come. Okay, now I want to jump into the subject of extremism with our health message. And this is one thing that has hindered the spreading of the message, and you'll see why as we get along this talk. Now, the big thing is we hear today is alternative medicine. And there's a new book out. I should have it here. Yes, Dr. Markham, Dr. James Markham, he's a cardiologist, Seventh-day Adventist cardiologist. He just wrote a book, and I'm going to use his quote because he put this in good words for me. So I always look for words. Alternative medicine, and the pastor brought this up to me. You know, alternative medicine is more for preventive medicine. It's not for acute medicine. And so there's a place for modern medicine, and he wrote this, and I've got a couple quotes from him. I want to just read about from him now. And Dr. Markham, the Adventist cardiologist, says this. This is where some well-meaning people miss an important point. We hear a lot about alternative medicine, potent herbal cures, or the importance of diet and exercise. And I will be the first to champion anything that has been proven to work. But there is, and always will be, a place for modern medicine, especially in emergency situations. If I have a heart attack, I want a stent. If my heart is going too slowly, give me a pacemaker. If I am bleeding to death, stop my bleeding and start a transfusion. If I have a bacterial infection, bring me some antibiotics. Without modern medicine, a whole lot of people would not be around to explore alternative medicine, examine herbal cures, or learn the importance of diet and exercise. Okay? So you get what he's saying? Now, it kind of repeats a little bit. Let me read a couple, just a small paragraphs. Again, let me say clearly that some medications are needed, but all medications produce stress on the human body. And we must take care to weigh the risk versus the benefits of their use. For instance, doctors are writing endless prescriptions for antibiotics while viruses are becoming more and more drug resistant. Why are they becoming drug resistant? Because all the antibiotics were taken. I don't know if you heard on CNN News the other day that they got a problem now with E. coli, which is in our colon. You know, we have a good E. coli in our colon. But they have a resistant strain, pathogenic E. coli, that they think coming from the chicken industry and chicken meat, that they cannot cure with antibiotics, this E. coli, and it's been passed on to humans now. And particularly women are having bladder infections with this E. coli, resistant to all antibiotics. So I'm telling you, we live in an interesting age, okay? One other statement he mentions, kind of a repetition, but he said, this is where some well-meaning people miss an important point. We hear a lot about alternative medicine, potent herbal cures, importance of diet. And then he says here that if I have a heart attack, he said, I'm overjoyed if science and technology is available to help me get through that. So that was an interesting statement. I thought he said it well. Now, don't think for a minute that I think modern medicine has all the answers. A lot of problems, true. But modern medicine, there's a place for it. And I like to say, there's a place for modern medicine, there's a place for alternative medicine. And I'll tell you some stories about that. But what bothers me as a physician is when I see people take such extreme views and people get sick and die because they're just so stubborn and they think it's a sin to go to a doctor or have a surgeon operate on them. I'm going to tell you specific stories about that. So extremism in a health message is driving people away from the health message. Now, yesterday I learned, when I got done, one preacher came in and said, you know, Neil, the first part I thought you were against the vegan diet, and then it said the second part of this lecture you thought were for it. Let me tell you right now, I try to practice being a vegan vegetarian. I'll tell you why in a little bit. But anyway, so let me set the record straight. But I'm talking now about people take extreme views and drive people away from this church because of their fanaticism. For instance, some people that you know very, very well have a recipe book out. I won't say too much about them, you know them well known, but in their recipe book, here's what they say in the back of the book. Special thanks to my dad, who was killed in 1979 by doctors in Florida. Next statement. Thanks to my mom, who taught me to make good tasting meals. The drug industry killed her in 1992. Now I'm telling you now, this will drive you away from doctors, right? They're evil. They killed my dad, killed my mother. This to me is extremism. I tell you, there's not a doctor in the country that tries to kill people. And people come to them sometimes, and I'm going to tell you this, they come late with their diseases. You try to help them, you can't help them. And doctors are not God. We can't do everything, okay? But this view, I think, is a wrong view to be printed out, that people are afraid to go to doctors. I'm going to tell you specific stories about that now. Okay, let's go on a little bit. Now, in Ellen G. White, and by the way, when you read Ellen G. White's books, you need to read all of it and get the context. She is very reasonable and not extreme and not fanatical. And she makes a statement here. Many are debilitated from disease and needing nourishing, well-cooked food. Health reformers, above all, should be careful to avoid extremes. So I want to make some more comments about that. We have a raw food philosophy going around, and I want to say this. I think there's a place for some raw food. Mrs. White, I don't think you can twist Mrs. White's writing to prove that she advocates all raw food. I know some people who, yes?
Dr. Mullins, I met a gentleman who said, my wife has to eat raw food, therefore I have to eat raw food, therefore you should have to eat raw food.
Well, this is what's going on. And I tell you what, there's a place for it, but I've talked to men from the General Conference. I've read the Spirit Box myself, and I think you are twisting the Spirit Box around when you say it. For instance, she mentions here in Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 108, great care should be taken when the change is made from a flesh meat to a vegetarian diet to supply the table with widely prepared, well-cooked articles of food. And she mentions about thoroughly cooked bread. So some people who are advocating that, I've watched them, and they say, oh, we don't believe in all cooked food. You know, a lot of them, I think maybe 70%, I don't know, they got some percent. But I watched, they never go through the line, they never eat a cooked potato, they never eat a baked bean, and they're always on the salad bar. You cannot live and get proper nutrition only from the salad bar and pig. You cannot get proper nutrition solely from raw food. So I'm telling you, it's extremism and it's pushing people away from our health. We need to go down the middle of the road. Particularly people who are just coming into the church I have a big burden for that, okay? Also, we've been counseled about other food. She says here in another statement, those who come to our sanitariums for treatment should be provided with a liberal supply of well-cooked food. I didn't have this in my notes, but it pops into my head now. Our hospitals have really deviated from this. They think they have to serve meat now to cater. Now, let me tell you, in the olden days, there was a young lady, not a Seventh-day Adventist. She's the one that started the temperance movements going across the United States. When she got through with those towns, they closed the bars in the town and the saloons. Okay, I got a whole book I could read you.
Because they used hatchets and sledgehammers.
Well, she didn't do it. She was not the one that did the hatchets. And she'd go into she'd get the mayor of the town and the wife on her side, and they started moving. They ended up closing the saloons. Now, she got sick, and she came to Battle Creek Sanitarium. She said, nobody preached to me about the Sabbath in there. Nobody preached me, but they didn't serve any meat, of course. And they said they would pray for her. Dr. Kellogg examined her personally. I didn't have this in my notes, but it just pops in my head. Dr. Kellogg examined her and said, you know, she has what we call dropsy, congestive heart failure, and she has this problem, and it's pretty serious. But anyway, so she was walking down the hall, and they found out they had a little prayer session for people who were sick. She said the people were so wonderful in that sanitarium, and godly and lovely. They didn't push their religion on me. People said, oh, they were pushing it. She said, they didn't push it. She went to that prayer session. They prayed for her, and guess what happened? They healed her. They healed her. She walked out of that sanitarium. Kellogg examined her, healed, and she became a Seventh-day Adventist. The General Conference grabbed her up, and she was one of the first ones to start the ladies' ministry and all this stuff in our denomination. Interesting story. But I thought about how our sanitariums today, our hospitals, they think they got to serve meat, you know, in order to get the clientele. Well, anyway, little deviation.
That's because all our doctors are not Adventists.
Yeah, especially not Adventist. But she was a non-Adventist, and she was impressed with the good food. She was impressed with the Spirit of Jesus in that place, and great things happened. Now, just a little quickie on this raw food thing. I said wherever fruit can be grown in abundance, a liberal supply should prepare for winter by canning or drying. You have to cook it. Is that right? That's right. The other thing is, Mrs. White, everywhere she went, she had a cook with her. And she said, get a good cook. So what I'm saying, I don't think at all Mrs. White advocates all raw food. If there's a place, she said, fix it as natural place as possible. If there's a place for cooked food, and I'll read you some letters from Linda to substantiate that in just a moment, okay? Now I want to tell you an interesting story. I don't have this memorized, I have to read some of it. When I was in college, a Reebok came there. I told you, he was from Ellen G. White Estates, and I never heard any of this stuff. And he touched on this subject, and so I'm going to tell you little stories, a couple stories, which kind of excite me. He said he was especially serious about our religion, and way back there, when the truth first came to our family, Reebok is talking now, he said, I was only a small boy, but was very much interested in all that I was hearing from a good lay brother who was doing missionary work. We were coming along very nicely in acceptance of the message that he was giving to us week by week. Just as we were reaching the point of decision, there came to our town listen to this word, a very well-intentioned woman. Okay, you've met this. She was so zealous and so earnest and so sincere that everybody admitted her, admired her, but she lacked tact and understanding. She made it a business to come to her house just at mealtime, be it dinner, breakfast, or supper. She did not come every day, but every visit was exactly at mealtime, not an hour before, not an hour after, just in time to be invited to sit down for the meal, which they did. She said, and of course, we were good Pennsylvanian Dutch people. Our table was spread with appetizing dishes of southern Pennsylvania. This woman never refused to sit down and have a meal with us. So when the whole family sat down, they said grace, thank God for the food. Then she would look over a table and very seriously say, that should not be on the table of a good Seventh-day Adventist. No Adventist would eat that. This certainly is not proper. Why, sister, if you begin to be an Adventist and eat things like that, you will never go to heaven.
Uh-oh.
Thus, she spent the whole time meal criticizing everything that was on the table. And he says, my dear friends, that is not right or proper. My mother was very anxious and much concerned about every one of those meal occasions. The result was Every member of my family turned against the truth, except his mother, his older sister, and himself, that they accepted this truth in spite of that lady, not because of her. But the rest of the family, he said, 40 years later, could not be approached with this message because he had driven her away. And this is my burden. This is my burden. Our health message is to make you more healthy, not more critical of your brother. Well, it shouldn't drive him away from the church, okay? It should help him to come into the church. So this is what my burden is. Now, he mentioned to Ellen G. White would never act like that. I'm sure she did. Now he tells another interesting story. He said he was at camp meeting. And he said, while he was at camp meeting, he said, a good brother came rushing to him one day and said, Elder Reebok, do you eat 3 meals a day? I answered, yes, brother, anytime I can get them. To which he replied, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven if you eat more than 2 meals a day.
Uh-oh.
Wow, I commented. I'm not so sure about that. Where did you ever get that idea? Why, he said, it's in the testimonies. Mrs. White wrote it. Oh, I asked, could you just tell me where that would be found? I'd like to read that. Well, he hesitated and stammered, and he said, brother, I don't know the book or the chapter or the page, but it's there. It's there.
Somewhere.
So he said, now, if you eat more than 2 meals a day, you'll never get in the kingdom of heaven. Well, I said, I think I'll read to you what Mrs. White's written on that subject. He said, we were very close to the book tent, so he said, I ran over there and I got a book entitled Medical Ministry, and turned to page 284, and I began to read to him. It is plain that 2 meals a day are better than 3. Why, he shouted. Of course, that is the very thing. Now it shows you that I was right. And still you eat 3 meals a day? I said, yes, sir. He replied somewhat triflingly, brother, your name is just wiped off the page. There's no hope for you at all. Then I looked at him and said calmly, but listen to the rest of the paragraph. That's kind of a Paul Harvey statement, isn't it? He said, I believe and practice this, Mrs. White said, quoting from Mrs. White, I believe and practice this. But she said, thus saith the Lord, it is that now let me get this straight. I believe and practice, but I have thus saith the Lord, that it is wrong for some to eat the 3rd meal. Now I smiled, brother. He said, brother, that means me. But that is not all. Listen to the rest of the paragraph. He said, we should not be like the Pharisees, bound about by set rules and regulations. His face changed. He said, brother, is that in there? And I replied, now let me read a little bit more. God's word is not specifying any set hours when food should be eaten. We're to be careful not to make laws like the Pharisees, or to teach for doctrines and commandments of men. Let your regulations be so considered that they will appeal to the reason of those even who have not been educated to see all things clearly. I looked at the poor man and said, brother, what do you get out of that whole paragraph? Well, he shook his head. I don't know what to say about that. I've been taught that anyone who eats more than 2 meals a day just can't be saved. And the Lord is going to judge every individual by how many meals a day he eats. If he eats 2, he'll be saved. If he eats more than 2, he will not be saved. Isn't that almost unbelievable?
Very simple.
But I want to tell you, we have almost the same thinking going on today, and I want to address that a little bit more. I can remember a few years ago, you don't know him because he's not in this conference now, I don't know if he's still a minister, but he was the pastor of the Bittville Church, and he came over to visit my teenagers. He came down, I just moved down here, all my teenagers, and he came to visit us and stand outside visiting. My kids, tried to be courteous, Brent got him a glass of 7-Up, and they handed it to him, and they held it like this. He didn't take a sip. He talked for another 30 minutes, handed it back to him, and left. Now, I'm going to tell you something. You're not going to hell to drink 7-Up. Okay? Now, he's so rigid in his idea. What kind of impression do you think he made upon my kids? Wrong impression. I know of a good friend of mine as a doctor. His brother was a minister in South America, a great man of God. Lived to be 96 almost. But he had a lot of problems with sickness when he came back to the States, because he said he'd go out into poor country there, in some of those places, and eat some of those people, and they didn't understand sanitation like we do today. He'd get sick, but he'd eat it anyway, because he had to be friendly, get close to people. And he won many people to Jesus. And that's the attitude I think that we need to have. Don't drive people away by our rigidness and to win them to Jesus. Now, when I was growing up, there was a lady called Mrs. Phillips. Later years, I found out that they said she thought she was going to take Mrs. White's place. We'd go out to visit her. It was always spooky. She lived in a little shack, black tar paper outside, and inside was dark, and she dressed in black, and to me, she looked like a witch. And she scared me. And she was always talking about visions she had seen. She'd seen an angel standing right over there, and the angel told me this, and the angel told me that. And it always scared me as a kid. We'd go out and get water for her. She had an old well with cobwebs on it. We'd push those aside, drop that rope way down there, and hear it splash and pull up water for her to drink. But I remember it scared me to death, and I remember what happened to her. She had this poor old house and a piece of property near a very wealthy city that either they owned it then or was part of their territory. But anyway, that property was very, very valuable. And she always talked to her, she was going to do something for God's cause. It ended up going to her wayward son, who was not in the church, who was wasted. I don't think one dime ever got into the church. Nothing ever came of her big visions either. But I never did forget her as a child. Now I'm going to tell you another story that I had as a physician recently. A young Adventist girl came to me about 21 years of age, just had some big nodes of tuberculosis here. Injected those things, took them out, sent them to pathology, and came back Hodgkin's disease. Now, Hodgkin's disease, certain forms of them, you can cure about 90% of those with radiation and chemotherapy. Her mother, being a strong Seventh-day begged her not to take chemo. I want to talk about this. Begged her with tears not to take chemo. Now, you can imagine how hard it was for her, being a good Adventist girl, her mother begging her not to take chemo. But thank God, I got some help by Dr. Rita Stecker, if any of you know of her from Hot Springs. She's a godly lady. She and her husband were brilliant students. I went to college with them. They're brilliant, but they're also godly. It's hard to get that combination. People that are smart, but also really godly. And she called me and says, Neil, she said, I don't think there's anything wrong with taking alternative medicine with modern medicine, do you? I thought that was a nice twist. I said, no, good idea. She convinced her to. And she rose above her mother and went and had radiation treatment. And I saw her here at camp meeting, took off her wig, had no hair. I saw her a year later, proud of me, showing her all her pretty hair. And I went to her wedding last December, and she married a good Christian boy. I tell you, if she would have listened to her mother, she would have been dead. She would have been dead. Now this is where extremism bothers me, you see. It kills people. And we ought to use modern medicine. Modern medicine doesn't have all the answers. Yes, there's possible. Now let me talk about chemo a little bit, because a lot of people don't understand chemo. Oh, chemo, ooh, you know, like it. When I was interning, I had the privilege of being in surgery when they opened up this lady to do a hysterectomy, take out her uterus. Opened her up, she was full of cancer. Now, I'm learning this. It's impressive to see it. Just cancer all over the place. Sewed her up, took her back floor. She took several months of chemo, and before I left that, I think it was providential. I don't know how I was on that service again, but I was on the same surgery with this lady. We opened her up. There was no cancer to be found. We took out her uterus. Boy, that made an impression on me. Now let me tell you a little bit about chemo. What chemotherapy, the theory behind chemotherapy, is that cancer are normal cells that go straight. It's kind of like juvenile delinquents. They got the same mom and the same dad, but they don't follow the rules, right? So they're normal cells that start multiplying more than they should in their rhythm, and they get growing big and putting pressure on organs and getting into organs, and that's what cancer is. Well, anyway, chemotherapy kills those fast-growing cells, what cancer is. Yes, it can damage some normal cells, but here's the problem. Some people come to the doctor way late. That cancer spread all over the place. You give them chemo, it isn't going to kill them. It isn't going to cure them. Yes, there's some danger with it, but I'm telling you, use your head and use some common sense. I have seen chemotherapy help a lot of people. People wipe that out as evil. You know. I have had people with breast cancer in my office survive 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. They had surgery for breast cancer and chemo. So people I know today in my church, they're it's of the devil, chemo. We got the wrong attitude, I think, about that. Now, I can tell you, down my street is my neighbor. I invited them to Babylon Rising. He came to that, shocked me. And we had Bible studies, about 23 Bible studies, and we're off for the summer. I hope that we can resume them. But anyway, we were real close friends. When I was gone to Peru, he watered my garden for me. He had cancer in 1982. They took out him at the MD Anderson, did surgery, took out, he's got a whole bunch of tissue emission from his neck down here. And he had 18 chemotherapy treatments. He's alive 30 years later. Now, I'm telling you, if he would listen to some of the people in my church, he'd been dead. Because chemo is evil. So we need to get a balanced perspective and knowledgeable understanding of these things so that we don't go into extremes. You see my point? That's what really bothers me, going to extremes. Now, I had just this week, a dear lady from the church called me and said, so I forget you a telephone number of my daughter. I said, fine, give my telephone. She called me up and listened to this story. She says, DHS has, my kids, the Department of Human Services, has her children. Does that tell you something? They have her children. But she was upset because they gave her immunizations. And I think they gave her one too many extra. And what can we do about that? She talked to the wrong person, didn't she? Now, you think about that. Now, I went to a medical meeting where they said, talking to doctors, when talking to preachers and doctors, you think, he said, in the last century, the last 100 years, what have been some of the greatest achievements in medicine? Number one is disposal of our sewer system. You think about that. You go to foreign countries now where they don't have the system we have. A lot of disease, rampant, not clean water. The second thing is immunization. Smallpox has been wiped out of the world because of immunizations. I'm so glad. I'm at the school. A girl had polio at the time of the polio epidemic. She had polio. We have an immunization for that. Now, I think, like a preacher talked to me yesterday, he said, Neil, they've got so many of these immunizations. What do you think? Well, I think maybe there's a question about taking too many immunizations. There's not proven facts. There's some questions about autism with that. And giving these little babies a flu vaccine when to change their diet. I think you got to use some discretion. But I want to tell you this. In general, immunizations save lives. Thank you. So we need to take a middle of the road and be careful of not going to extremes about that. Now, my little niece used to brag about her 2 children. No sugar just passed between those lips. Isn't that wonderful? Mm-hmm. Both of them are out of the church. Okay. One of them comes to church some, because I ran down and visited him, and he's told me about Grandma. Grandma's the one that came into the church, and she's an Adventist today. And he says, Grandma, she has congestive heart failure, edema of her legs. She's eating too much pop, soda pop. I know that's the cause of that. I went out to eat with him, and he ate a big fat piece of meat. And I thought, what's more important? Drinking soda pop or eating meat? Which is more harmful? We get things out of balance, you know, we get all messed up on some little rat race, and take the middle of the road on some of these things. I want to say this, alternative medicine is not a cure for cancer. And what I feel bad, I have seen people who have given them raw food for 4 months trying to cure cancer. What do you think that cancer did in those 4 months? Growing and growing, and they're dead now. I feel bad about that. I really feel bad. Well, will you show me in the spirit of prophecy what's wrong to use an antibiotic? Someone said one time, they said, Mrs. White could see a poor plate. You know what we do, like, if you have a bad infection, like I had a person recently in the ear from jail, and I swallowed it out, you put that out on a poor plate, and you grow those germs out. Then you put a little antibiotic disc on it to see which antibiotic will kill it. Okay? Will you show me the spirit of prophecy where it's wrong to use an antibiotic? I can't find that. Will you show me the spirit of prophecy where it's wrong to go to a surgeon? But people have these extreme views. Oh, don't go to a surgeon. They let the cancer grow and grow and grow, and then after they're sick and dying, they went to a surgeon to put some kind of a rod in the leg so it wouldn't break the bone because the cancer is spread to the bones and all over. But why didn't you get cancer of the breast when it first had it? They do quite well today with cancer of the breast, I want to tell you. So I think we need to find out the facts and go down the middle of the middle of the road. I had another friend, good layperson, dedicated to the Lord. He loved the Lord. His little baby, which is not his first baby, but his third baby, got pneumonia. He wouldn't give him any medicine. He wouldn't go to a doctor. The baby died. I feel bad about that. Most of those kids you can save, okay? Well, the town got in an uproar, and the policemen and the fire department were really mad. What did he do? He picked up and moved out of town just like overnight, because there would have been a lawsuit, I'm afraid, but he just disappeared off the scene. So I think that we got to be careful about these extreme views that are not in the spirit prophecy. Now, soy. I met a lady down in Ozark Natural Foods here. I was shopping, and she said, "Oh, don't use soy." My chiropractor said, "Don't use any soy. Oh, it's bad." I got another guy that met me in church one day and said, "Soy grows breasts on the man." Is that true? Let me read you a letter from Loma Linda. I wrote Loma Linda a letter, and I got back a letter from Kenneth Burke, PhD, and registered dietitian, Department of Nutrition and Dietetics at Loma Linda. He's retired now. He said this: although soy does not contain estrogen, it does contain compounds that have some biological action somewhat similar to that of estrogen. The consensus of peer-reviewed research literature, such as is found in the National Library of Medicine, you have free access to this, by the way, in the way, appears to substantiate the safety of consuming soy products. However, isolated phytoestrogens extracted from soy or other plants may not be safe when consumed at high levels. For those with a history of diagnosed breast cancer, the high intake of alfalfa products, soy products, and isoflavones supplements is not recommended. However, a modest intake of soy products is not shown to be a hazard. Then he goes on to say this: although some websites allege that soy consumption causes male breast development, there's little evidence that male breast development results in consuming soy products such as tofu, soy milk, etc. There's been a long-term study, now listen to this: physical, sexual, mental, emotional follow-up on infants fed soy formula. About 30 years of data. There appears to be no real difference in physical, sexual, emotional, or mental development between those fed soy infant formula and those fed non-soy formula. The writer says to me, he said, "I have personally been consuming above average levels of soy products for 25 years and have not shown any breast development." In a few minutes, we're going to have a break, and I'm going to give you a copy of that, okay? Now, let me read you another letter from Loma Linda, because, you know, I've been guilty of making fun of Loma Linda, and I have to be careful of that. I met a godly surgeon from Loma Linda that I had some health talks with, and there's some good men in Loma Linda. We have in our church not only some smart preachers in theology, we got some smart doctors, and we had some smart teachers. We have some people in this denomination. They're second best to none. And I'm proud of our university out there, and I wrote them about other question here, and let me just read this to you. Because they told me you don't want to cook food, you're not going to use a microwave. A microwave is evil. Did you know that? Wrecks the food. Well, I talked to a physicist one time, and he gave a lecture over here, telling me that those are like radar waves. As you're sitting here, radar waves are going all through you. Did you know that? Hasn't bothered you? And so I said the microwave is the same thing. People get the most bizarre things going on that they're saying. So he says that what's the facts in cooking food more than 120 degrees? Some say it kills all the enzymes. I said, is this true? His answer is yes. Heating food above 120 degrees Fahrenheit destroys the activity of most enzymes. Heating also destroys naturally occurring food toxins. So if so, what happens to the food? He says, usually nothing bad. It often causes better digestion and absorption of vitamins, protein, of which enzymes are made, other nutrients, and valuable phytochemicals. Now he said a longer answer. Enzymes that occur in food play little or no favorable role in the body for the following reasons. A, enzymes perform specific chemical reactions in specific cells and require specific conditions of pH, temperature, and osmolality. B, most chemical reaction conditions in plant cells are different from those needed in mammalian cells, which you and I have. Most enzymes C are too big to be absorbed into the bloodstream from the normal mature gut. And D, all enzymes are made of protein. This protein must be in the exact shape to be active. E, the acid in the stomach is designed to change the shape of proteins in order to facilitate digestion of protein-containing foods. And F, since enzymes are made of protein, if they're absorbed into the bloodstream, likely the body will fight against them and produce allergic response. So question, is it no good for food? Answer, in many cases, heating is essential to render the food safe to eat. Isn't that interesting? So I tell you that I'm gonna give you a copy of that in just a minute. One statement I mentioned, he gave me a paragraph on raw food. He said, although it is true that daily consuming some non-processed or lightly processed foods such as raw fruit, salads, appear to promote health, eating all raw foods generally decreases food access. Many raw foods such as beans, lentils, grains, cassava contain heat-labile toxins or anti-nutrients that when properly prepared provides readily available required nutrients. Boy, it's hot in here. Is it just me or?
No, it's not you.
Okay. All right, we're just gonna wind this up now. Health reform is to make you more healthy. Is that not true?
Mm-hmm.
And not more critical of your brother. Right?
This is a
I was at a Christmas party
side effect.
in Rogers Church, and we had a urologist come there. Non-seven-Adventist urologist. First time I ever set foot in Rogers Church. Came to a Christmas party. A lady stood up and out loud in front of everybody, she says, now I want to know, I'm a vegan. Is there any milk or eggs in this pie? Now she was as wide as she was tall. All right? But she made this big announcement. She's since had a bad stroke, is in a wheelchair. Now I want to tell you something. Health reform ought to make you more healthy.
Right.
And you shouldn't have to be shouting it to your neighbor. Let them look at you can tell. Okay? I may tell more about my daddy, but I just say this. My daddy was a non-Seventh Adventist, came to my graduation